Welcome back, podcast listeners, to Superhero Chicken Fest, Episode 3. We're back with 4 hosts and 4 new microphones to do this show every other week for the foreseeable future. This week's episode contains spoilers for the Avengers Infinity War, Black Panther, Spider-Man Homecoming, Ant-Man, probably Daredevil, and, probably just a bunch of Marvel stuff, actually, so just tread lightly. Nothing about Captain Marvel, though. We hadn't seen that yet. This week's episode is also sponsored by the color purple. Purple is an intermediate between blue and red. It's most often associated with rarity, royalty, magic, mystery, and piety. It's also a 1982 novel by Alice Walker that was later adapted into a film that I think Oprah Winfrey was in.
Superhero Chicken Fest! Woo! Woo!
Jeez.
Oh my god.
I'm Kyle. I'm here with...
Allison.
Rachel.
Ian.
And we haven't done one of these in a long time, but don't worry about that. We're just gonna jump right back into it, like that gap never happened.
We can just call this episode 1, right? Like, isn't every episode before this one about Spider-Man?
They do both have Spider-Man in them.
So this one has no Spider. Oh, dang! It does though.
That's not true at all. It's a superhero themed podcast. They're all gonna have Spider-Man in them at some point. All right, let's all learn to deal with that reality.
All right.
So Ian, what's our topic for today?
All right, our topic today is, to be like clear and concise and specific, villains, starring Infinity War.
Yeah, so that's basically how it's going to run from this point on. Is we're gonna have a movie, then we're gonna have a topic kind of surrounding that movie, and then just gonna like discuss, I guess.
Whoa, is that what podcasts do?
There's like a general question to answer.
Sure. I think what makes a compelling villain in this case,
Right?
As opposed to like not just a paper villain, not just a 2D villain, but what makes a well-developed villain that is enticing.
Turns out it's the color purple.
Well, the color purple makes everything enticing, I think, is worth pointing out.
Hold on, sorry, is Thanos purple?
Yes.
What?
Oh no!
I thought he was blue this whole time.
Kyle.
He was
He's
blue
still-
in one of the movies, and then he was
definitely
purple.
purple.
He's always been purple. He's been like super purple.
No, he was blue in like
was,
Guardians
like-
of the Galaxy. He was like powder blue.
No,
No.
Oh,
You're thinking of
something.
You're thinking of Kree, the Kree leader.
Well, because there were definitely blue people. I thought
Right.
he was the same color.
That's not Thanos. That's
No,
somebody
Thanos
else.
has 100% been blue. This
No,
is
you're
not what I wanted
Showing
to
me the
talk
picture
about on
doesn't
this
help. I appreciate
podcast.
it, but
Hey, he's purple there.
You're thinking of Nebula's actual dad.
sorry, I didn't mean to derail us.
No, I'm gonna find it. I've seen a post about
It's
this.
definitely a tangent worth discussing. He is in fact purple. In case there are any other broken people out there.
What's really
Rachel,
fun is watching
Kyle.
back. Is going back and
Well,
looking
no,
at
I know he's purple, but he was blue before.
the original shot of Thanos in like what? Iron Man or something? I forget which one. Where like, the after credit scene where he just like turns around and grins.
Yeah.
Comparing that to Thanos now is very funny.
Is
wait.
it still Josh
Look,
Brolin?
I
Blue.
see,
It's nobody
I see
back
a
then.
blue.
Blue.
one. Yeah, he was blue
Let me
actually.
see.
Blue.
That's a Photoshop. That's not real.
No, it's real. He was blue.
That's
Blue.
All right, I'm
Okay,
going to
it
move
doesn't
this
matter.
thing forward because...
Thanos, as we know it, is purple.
very purple.
Okay, so apparently making
Lightly
him purple
purple.
is the
Right.
answer to the question. So
So-
we solved it, guys.
All right,
I think
that's
this
it.
is very
Pack
important
it up.
to us specifically because we, especially when Infinity War was going on, we were like in the dead mid of finishing up writing Skyvault.
This is actually the thing I remember the most about it was in the theater going, like, I think I leaned over to you and I was like, Thanos is just Shay. This is our character.
right.
This is what we've been writing for the last 2 years.
We've been trying so hard to write a sympathetic villain. Now I think this is like maybe showing my hand a little bit. Like I don't think to make an enticing or compelling villain they have to be sympathetic, but I think in recent times the most enticing and compelling villains have been sympathetic.
I don't think that Thanos is sympathetic.
Well, okay,
He's
I should define sympathetic as
understandable.
somebody whose motives aren't selfish and make sense from their perspective, even if it's a war perspective.
Yeah, I actually was just
Yeah.
rereading my favorite screenwriting book ever, Screenwriting 101 by Filmcrit Hulk. And he
It's not
mentions
sponsored.
he's talking about making characters sympathetic as well, and his point is that sympathetic just means that you understand why they're doing what they're
Yes.
doing. It doesn't
Ah,
mean
I
you would
see.
do it yourself. It just
That's
means like when you're
empathetic.
watching Breaking Bad, you can be like, I get why Walter's doing this stuff.
Yeah.
I would never do any of it.
Oh, yeah.
But like I'm it's clear enough that I can follow him as a person.
It's
Right.
also kind of what makes anti-heroes work in that sense.
Yeah.
Which and I that's maybe something to talk about later is like the difference
Yeah.
between an anti-hero and a compelling or sympathetic villain.
That's a good point, yeah.
I was so my when I was thinking about what makes a sympathetic villain or a compelling villain, where I got most strongly was whether or not you actually agree with them. Like, so what's necessary is to understand why they're doing what they're doing, right? And I think the key, like the sort of the secret key, is having a lot of scenes that involve the villain working on their stuff without the heroes there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this is common between Thanos and Wilson Fisk, who is I think like they're two of my favorite villains in the past 5 years.
Yeah, they're definitely two at the top. Well, it's I was laughing because I think it's almost like a weird variation on the Bechdel test.
Kind of,
where it's like you don't want to just see the villain in reference to their interaction with the heroes. Like you want to see them like operating
as a fully powered character.
It makes them a more compelling character if it's like you see them interacting with people that aren't your main characters and kind of like having their own agency that has something to do with like their own goals and stuff, and it doesn't all center around, Captain America or whatever.
I guess it kind of like, so a villain that like, so I know in creative writing circles, it's very popular to talk about how much easier it is to write your villains than your heroes, which I think it just kind of goes into the like, I'm in middle school and edgy sort of vibe a little bit. But like part of it is, so a well-written villain should have goals that are big enough that they don't need the hero. Like unless there are definitely stories that involve undercutting the hero specifically, like those that like sort of make you reflect on the hero poorly, like all you're saving the city has really ruined my group of people or something. But unless it's but typically a poorly written villain will have a plan that just so happens to involve the hero as like a central aspect, whereas a well-written villain should have plans that basically your hero just gets in the way of, but isn't necessarily a part of.
That's an interesting point.
Let's recap this a little bit. So Thanos, in the movie, his ultimate goal is to erase the entire population of the entirely half of the population of the universe, because it's just
resource scarcity
now. Resource scarcity.
He's just like a plague bringer. Yeah, it's like the whole thing with like how the Black Plague in real life ended up technically helping Europe in the long run because it like
kickstarted the Industrial Revolution,
killed off people that were using up all their resources.
Right.
Thanos is like that
I'll
guy.
be that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of problems with this, like, why not double the resources? But that's because of land use space, probably, or something. I don't know. Or if we half all of life in the universe, does that include plants? The Russo brothers say it does, which just ruins the whole point.
Oh. Okay,
half
so
of all the corn
that's
is gone.
essentially the idea that they make us like sympathetic towards. Like we get it.
Goal.
We're like, okay, yeah, because people are their own worst problem anyway.
Yeah,
but
they do a pretty good job
all forms of life, I guess.
Yeah,
are their own worst problem.
Well, I don't think that we would normally play on that trope with. Or do you mean aliens? What do you mean by all forms of life?
Creatures.
Yeah, because he wipes out half the living things in the universe. I guess that.
Which, I don't know. To me, like, there's definitely some limitations on it. Like surely, like he's talking about multiple galaxies that are far enough apart. They definitely don't interact with each other. Like there's definitely planets out there who are probably like, what about all the hippie planets that are like totally in tune with all the resources, man? But
well, he doesn't.
He doesn't.
He doesn't. And that's kind of why he's great, right? Because he's consistent. Like,
he seems to prioritize like pleasure in individual lives over like just the experience of life as a whole.
I think
so.
If that makes sense, like he's going for quality of life rather than quantity, to put it in a very rough way.
I think actually my favorite thing about Thanos was his relationship with Gamora.
Yeah, actually.
Which is incredibly complicated and relatable, like weirdly relatable. I think to actually just like a lot of, I might be totally overstepping here, but I think a lot of like father-daughter relationships can be weird in like the power dynamics that exist. Not like I'm going to kill you later and also you're kidnapped or whatever, but just like, I don't know, I found it really, really relatable, not their type of relationship, but just some of the elements that it plays on in how that relationship would function under those stresses that exist.
One of the things I remember specifically coming out of Infinity War was, because so far we had seen Thanos characterized most strongly by Gamora and Nebula in previous movies. And then what we find out is she's wrong. Like everything we hear from Gamora is he doesn't care about us at all. He just uses us as tools. There's absolutely no, like he's a cold, heartless hunk of rock that sort of pretends to be a sentient being. But we see him very explicitly have emotional reactions to Gamora.
Right.
And if it makes sense that she wouldn't see those, or she wouldn't necessarily count them. But the fact is, the way she said it was wrong.
I disagree, but
she says he doesn't care at all. He does care. It may not be enough. It may be wrong. It may be, but to say that he doesn't care is inherently wrong.
Well, his version of love is strange because he thinks that the best thing for the universe is to wipe out half the life in it, and he thought the best thing for Gamora and what's her face Nebula was to train them in a really intense way that made them strong and that made them value power. That's the idea.
I know that we're trying to avoid tangents, but it's basically like making the argument that the person that cares about you is the one that can still beat you because they care enough to like keep you safer in line, and that's how they think that works.
Well, that's not what I mean,
So like
though. It's
that's that's how that relationship works. Like
But
he doesn't.
it's not what happened though. It's like but he specifically like you see his when he realizes he has to sacrifice Gamora. By the way, guys, spoilers.
I'm gonna. Well, that's listed at the beginning of all these episodes.
Anyways, but like when he realizes he has to sacrifice Gamora, he is hurt because he doesn't want to lose her.
Yeah,
That
but he
means-
still murders her. So
He still does it. I mean, he says
So
that's the line. The greatest of sacrifices require the strongest of wills, etc. It is a sacrifice to him. And in fact, if it wasn't a sacrifice, it wouldn't have gotten him the Soul Stone. It actually has to matter to him for him to get the Soul Stone. So it does. You know, I totally get why Gamora doesn't see that, because from her perspective, that's not caring at all. But so he failed to express that effectively. But he does actually care for her, or else the whole thing wouldn't have worked.
Which is kind of why, that's why I think he works so well as a character, because he has a psychology, again, that makes sense, even if you look at it and you go like, well, that's screwed up.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, like, the internal logic is consistent. Like, you can see that in his mind, this is how the universe works.
True, and I think he's the ultimate embodiment of the ends justify the means philosophy, which is a philosophy
Oh,
a
man.
lot of people really do have. Like,
Yeah.
Let's bring in John Locke.
even though, like,
Not that John Locke.
even though a lot of people like would approach things from like a solidly good versus evil perspective, if you could justify one good thing happening from doing a bunch of evil things, I think a lot of people would still be on board with that, which is why Thanos' like population control idea is pretty appealing, and that his relationship with Gamora works the same way. Like, he treated her badly in order that she might become the kind of person that he deemed good, which is a person like him who is strong and willing to exert will and strength and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot about individual empowerment at
Exactly.
the expense of anybody else. It doesn't really like, so in that sense, I guess you could say like his training Gamora and Nebula to be weapons is entirely in line with his idea that the individual should be able to bring about what they want, regardless of what anybody else tries to do to stop them.
So first thing established is that they do a really good job at making him like sympathetic, right? We can follow his line of thinking and even relate to it on like some level.
Sure.
Is there more to it? Like more that makes him
Right. Well, I think that he is the embodiment of a philosophy that's really popular today. The ends justifies the means type of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, and people are really worried about overpopulation in general, so that makes him appealing.
Like, one of the things that makes him such a great villain is that he's absolutely terrifying.
That's
Like
true,
they
too,
still
yeah.
they
Right.
make him like scary enough that even though we can kind of relate, and even though we can see even like a dad side to him, and also like a warrior side of him, it's like he's actually super scary.
Like they start off.
He really does do a good job of embodying kind of like the way you might view your dad if you were 5. Like he is all powerful. If there's a bad situation where he appears to get hurt or die, he reverses it magically in your own eyes. Like,
Right.
and he is still really gentle. He is so gentle with Gamora in the scenes where they're little. Even when they're older, he's very gentle. He does like a scary ass whisper,
Yeah.
I think so.
and that's very like dad.
Part of is the gentleness. Like, I mean, so his introductory scene in Infinity War is him beating the Hulk in a fist fight.
That's what I was going to mention.
Which is
a lot of my favorite characters have been, or character moments have been when they can somehow establish somebody's entire personality or threat level, like with one scene.
right, and but without invoking
It's a
like the
good-
Worf effect, right? Is the deal.
What is it? Describe that.
So
for
in
people who
Next
don't- I know
Generation-
what it is obviously, but for people who don't know,
In Next Generation Star Trek, right? There's a character Worf. He's a Klingon. He's a crew member.
Yeah.
And he's the security officer, right? He is the big bad tough guy. What that means is anytime they want to show that the situation is getting serious, they have somebody beat up Worf. What this means is Worf looks like a pansy.
he gets beat up a lot.
Right. So it's something like you have to. I think, and this is more of a. This isn't necessarily about being a good villain. This is just like a delicate writing thing. One thing they do particularly well with Thanos is they never make him seem too cheap. Like his victories seem earned. He doesn't he beats up the Hulk, but it doesn't look like it's not like the Hulk is only at 20% power or whatever. Like it's
Right.
it's
Right.
it doesn't
He's just
it doesn't
actually stronger than the Hulk.
it doesn't
Like,
devalue the Hulk. He already has the Power Stone, I think, is the deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and he's not full of empty threats, right? Like, that's another reason
Right.
he's scary, because he's like, I'm going to snap my fingers and the whole world's going to disappear. And people are like, are you, though? And then he murders his daughter, and you're like, oh, shit.
Right.
Dude's going to do it.
Oh, well, the other, he also just kills Loki immediately before he beats up the Hulk. He actually just kills Loki.
Well, he gives Loki
Right.
a chance to concede first.
Yeah.
And then when it's Loki tries to do a backstabby thing, and he's like, none of that. And then just snaps Loki.
Right. I just as far as like a writing thing goes, it was like the perfect move to start the movie off with to set the tone.
Right.
Because
So
like
upsetting.
Loki has specifically avoided dying in true Marvel fashion like 3 times up
Right.
until that point, and then they start the movie by killing him and then having the main villain all but turn to the camera and go, "He's actually dead this time."
I really hope they don't bring Loki back. Like,
I don't think they can. I think he's dead.
I mean, I think they're going to bring back almost everybody else,
It would be a massive
including
mistake
maybe
if they-
Gamora.
But Loki goes with Thor, and they're not going to bring back Thor. I mean, Thor's going to disappear, I guess.
I feel like
so
the
it-
future of the next movie is a different topic. I think
Right.
we
Well,
can
I
maybe
mean-
get into that at the end, but
Well,
we're gonna
sure, but-
we can
Right.
go off for a long time speculating on what's going to happen in the next
Yeah.
installment.
I saw a post that was one of my the better posts I saw about Infinity where somebody say, "Can we just all give a moment to thank Tom Hiddleston for doing a full press junket for 18 months for this movie to show up for 5 minutes?"
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he
dedication.
deserves that.
I mean, so and if criticism of Marvel movies I normally ignore because I like them and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
But one of the more valid criticisms is a lack of consequences. It's like Age of Ultron killed off Quicksilver, and it's like, ooh, we killed an Avenger. He was an Avenger for 4 minutes, but. And so I think it'd be great if they actually just had Loki stay dead.
I feel like they're going to, but again,
Yeah.
like I have a whole idea of how I want this to play out.
Sure.
That I could like spend an entire podcast on just talking about
Later.
that.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got.
So to bring it back around to the
Yeah.
goal is to figure out what makes a good villain.
Yeah.
Right.
What are other examples of similar characters?
Fisk.
Fisk.
That have-
Fisk
oh, yeah,
is the
okay,
number
yeah,
one.
yeah.
I mean, so the number I think. Well, Fisk is interesting because he does the thing I mentioned where of spending a lot of time just with Fisk and without.
Yeah, I remember the reason I loved him. I actually still haven't seen this redone, and I've forgotten sometimes how amazing it was seeing it the first time. But Fisk was introduced by
Right.
watching him try to woo this
I
woman
was
at
gonna
an
say,
art
like,
gallery
the other
for an
thing is-
entire episode.
That was
the very
amazing.
First
It
thing we
was.
do is we see him humanized because he's socially awkward and asks
Yeah.
a girl out and he's terrified.
I've never
Yeah.
seen any villain introduced that way, like ever.
Right. And they kind of do it again with Dex in the 3rd season.
Yeah.
Different thing, but they do it. They definitely get into humanizing Dex.
Right.
It's humanizing is the deal. It's like I mean and in some ways Fisk is a lot more relatable than
Yeah.
Thanos because it's not
We
any
don't
of
get
this.
to see that part of Thanos
Right,
at
well,
the beginning.
And it's not this whole like galactic level thing. It's like he has his city, right? And he wants to he's basically just like he wants to engage in aggressive gentrification.
I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting. I would argue that another really good villain, though like not super comparable to Thanos, would actually be the villain from Jessica Jones. And it's almost because he's more hateable. And the reason is because like
He is good.
he is really
He is
good.
also David Tennant.
He's
which
also
is
David
cheap.
Tennant.
I know, yeah, no, it's but like people can like back Thanos, right? Like people can be like, I'm on Thanos' side because he's a badass
Sure,
and he's strong.
kind of,
but you
yeah.
can't do that for the Jessica Jones villain because he just rapes women.
That is true.
Like,
He's
that's, like,
actually
his-
harder to sympathize with than the Joker.
But
Like
they
I've heard
still-
people go like,
but-
there's the whole group of people that are like the Joker is the right one all along or something, but nobody ever
Right.
says that
I mean,
about the Purple Man.
Yeah.
They're both purple, but
Again,
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
This is
I-
guys. We solved this in the first 5 minutes. All right, you make the villain purple. That's how you make it.
I think that the Purple Man though is actually more like a concept, rather than a character in a lot of ways. Like we don't
Sure.
actually see him for quite some time.
Yeah.
And he's more like a crystallization of the will of others around you or something like that. I am not totally sure because I
Well-
haven't thought about it for a long time, but
I mean, they actually he's in the series pretty often. They do a
Yeah.
pretty good job at like developing his relationship with Jessica, and I mean,
But
you
he's-
you
right,
realize
but
it's
he's-
some sort of like twisted love story on his end, and he like sees things different
Well-
than how they actually happen, and that like you
Right.
you kind of you don't ever like back him, but you're like, oh, well he's crazy, like he he thinks that it's love,
Well,
but
so
he's manipulating it, and, like
One of my favorite things about Purple Man, and this is something again, I have a slight development on this at the end of this, but so like they there's a moment where he brings up, how would I know that this is compulsion or not? Everybody, anytime I've ever asked, people do what I say, and you almost for a flicker of a second think, and then he makes people try and kill themselves. You're like, no,
Right.
Right.
that's not a nobody ever tells me no thing. That's a psychopath thing. But I think that makes
Yeah.
him better because it's like it's easy to fall into a trope of there's a reason he's terrible, and we can say, like, I think that's a mistake because then we're stuck in this awkward place where we want to kind of support him, but he does terrible things, and it's like it doesn't really give us any sort of.
Actually, yeah, I
okay,
kind of agree.
but who's a better villain? Like
Well, I was gonna say,
Oh, go ahead.
Like, so my favorite other example of this is not a villain. It's the Doctor House. Like, because
This is the anti-hero villain comparison, I think.
a bit,
actually.
yeah. It's like the idea is House has a bum leg, and so he's always been like you are enticed to think that he's an absolute dick to other people because everybody's treated him like a cripple his whole life, and he's become rough around the edges to like ward that off, that feeling of pity, right? And then we meet his ex-wife at the end of the first season. She goes, "No, he's always been this way." And I think that makes him a much better character because then there's not a simple solution to his evil.
Well, so like if Thanos hadn't actually destroyed half the universe, I would argue that, well, I guess it just depends on taste, right? What makes the villain better? I would argue, only because I don't see it as often, it's a scarier existence. I think the David Tennant, the purple man from Jessica Jones, is one of the scariest villains, and I would argue that that's such an important thing because I don't necessarily need to sympathize as long as I get that glimpse of like, oh, this dude's never, like, I can kind of get it. No one's ever told him no, so like you kind of understand where it comes from. But then then he makes people like kill himself, and he's been raping women for like his entire life, and you're like, that's a bad, like,
I was actually
that's
just
scariest.
thinking about this too because I was thinking like Kingpin seems like the best example specifically because you get to know him as a person before you see him do bad things. But Purple Man had a different point to his character. Like he was introduced as a specter almost, and then
because it's
you
like
get
4
to know him.
episodes.
Yeah,
before we
that's
see
a
him.
good point.
Both work like
Yeah.
equally well for
Now-
their stories.
I think. Go ahead.
I mean, you got to ask yourself, like, if you're asking who's the best villain, like, what do you want out of your villain? Like,
Sure.
the Purple Man
Yeah, I
is
guess it
scarier,
depends.
but he doesn't. I don't think he represents like he doesn't represent a person that can exist symbolically. He represents human will that's unchecked. It represents like all the darkness in the human heart. If all of it could come to fruition every time, and that's what's so scary. Like you said before, Allison, people are their own worst enemy. Like he is the very embodiment of that concept. Whereas Thanos represents like an ordered universe, but it's an order that you don't morally agree with. It's what happens when, you know, a corporation becomes insanely powerful and then exerts their will over everything, or like or the British Empire takes things over. You know, it's that kind of thing. Like it's a like logical evil versus pure desire acted out.
This is chaotic neutral versus lawful evil, kind of.
Yeah.
I think worth pointing out, like, it's not necessarily the point of your comparison, but like the difference between like a corporation or like the British Empire style evil versus Thanos is, I don't think Thanos is selfishly motivated at all. I think it's not about self-interest. It's about.
That's a good point.
It's like
That is a good point.
He's just definitely for the greater good.
Yeah, bringing it back around again to the fact that it's very similar to the character that we wrote.
Right.
Which it isn't super relatable to people listening because they haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But just you wait.
But it does kind of give like we've analyzed this character pretty heavily because we had to write the same character at some point, and you're right. It's they actually think they're doing the right thing. Like they are very moral in their mind. They are helping everyone. They're actually not doing it for themselves.
This is so I like to make a division between moral and ethics, and my own personal definitions involve moral is like what you think is right, and ethics are what is right to apply to a population, in the sense that Thanos is what happens when there's a morals and ethics mismatch under my definitions. Like he is a straight moral force, not thinking that it's not okay to do this to other people. Like it's not what he does isn't quote unquote ethical, but it is following his moral standard. He's trying to apply to his own personal code across. So in a way, I mean, he's not selfishly motivated. What he does is very selfish because he doesn't exactly ask everybody if they want to join in on his little plan.
I guess maybe that's what makes Thanos, like, you could argue Thanos is more of an intimidating or scarier villain purely because you could relate to him, and so the fear kind of comes from an internal perspective of like, I've had this mentality on things before, or at least I've agreed with them, and that's a little bit scarier because most people aren't like, I would rape women if I could read minds. Like, they don't think
But if it's
that.
a situation where it's like, am I this wrong about something? Like, is
Right.
it like, am I thinking this way about something in my life?
right.
There's a good division to be made between, am I afraid I think this, or am I afraid this will happen to me?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, very much.
And I guess they're both scary in different ways.
Right.
So.
I think so. Going back to what you said about Kilgrave specifically being very scary.
That's his name.
Kilgrave.
yeah, well, it's both.
They make fun of that in the show, right? Kilgrave. That's like that's like violent murder as a name or something.
Yeah.
I think part of it comes down to, do I believe this villain am I scared by his ability to do what he's planning on, or she is planning to do, And would it bother me if that happened? Like, if you have, like, I'm the masked magician and I will make all ace of spades into bunny shapes. It's like, cool. Like, it's not necessarily scary. It's about realistic consequences. Or, I mean, not
Expectations?
Like, expectations and, related, but, like, it's not realistic that somebody could wipe out half the life in the universe. But if they did, that would suck.
Well, they made it seem like it could be.
Right.
Right.
That's all in tone. That's in presenting your character. That's in making your character, like, for one thing, if your heroes are flippantly disregarding your villain, that's fun a lot of the time. But it doesn't, unless the point is that your heroes are underestimating the villain, it means I can't respect your villain either.
Yeah. That makes me so mad about X-Men, but that's a talk for another movie.
So it's sounding like
Wait.
sort of like some of the things we're circling are making a good villain involves
Sympathy.
making someone
Relatability.
who is presenting a realistic and kind of like easily relatable threat from a place that you can actually recognize as like being valid, like
As you can understand.
Yeah, from a
that was summed
sympathetic
up really well.
motivation kind of. So it's like it feels threatening because if it happened, you can imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
And it feels realistic because they're presenting you with this person's like motivation for it, and you're like, oh crap, yeah, somebody could actually do that. Like if somebody were like that and also had this power in the case of a supervillain or something.
Can we think of any example that has both of those that isn't a good villain though?
That's a good question.
It has
Because if we can't, then that might be the answer.
understandability.
Yeah, I mean, and a threat to them, like.
What are some of the bad Marvel villains?
let's
Because
see,
they've been
so-
criticized a lot for their villains in other movies.
I think this is a fair example, a fair exercise. Is let's take bad villains, apply these two standards to them, and fix them, and see if it works.
Okay, yeah.
What
So
about,
my first thought is Yellow Jacket.
Ant-Man, yeah, that's everybody's least favorite.
Yellow
Right.
Jacket?
Yeah, he's the. So
I
he's,
literally do not even remember.
That's why.
I know.
He's the bald guy. Surprise.
Yellow Jacket was.
Yeah.
I'm going to attempt to summarize it
Yeah.
very quickly. He was Hank Pym's partner or something, and he wanted to make the technology, but Hank was like, I don't want to let people use this because it's too dangerous. And so then he got mad and tried to steal it.
I honestly.
And I think that was his entire arc, right? Was
Well,
that
so
it?
a lot of it is he had the hots for Evangeline Lilly, kind of, which is weird. Like,
Right.
So a lot of the Yellow
doesn't?
Jacket. What?
Nothing. Sorry. That was completely inappropriate.
What did you actually say?
I said, who doesn't?
Oh yeah,
But, like
I thought
really
about
close
saying
to the
that.
microphone.
So a lot of it is he came across as like, because they tried to give him human moments, they just failed really badly. It's like there's moments like when he comes. It's been a long time since I've seen Ant-Man. Not unrelated. When he comes into Hank Pym's house and he's like trying to and then he's like kind of weird and creepy and he's like in a hoodie and he's like ends up holding somebody up at gunpoint. I think
Oh, right, yeah.
he like kidnaps Hope or something.
I forgot that happened.
Right, but he's got like this weird unhinged thing. And another part of it is this maybe goes back to what you were saying, Rachel, about expectations as opposed to like realistic. Like, so at one point he just he's like talking to the Department of Defense or whatever, and he just turns one of their suits into a pile of goop and then flushes them down the toilet. And that came out of kind of like nowhere. And it's like, it didn't really make me. It's like
I have a comparison
I feel like
actually.
this is okay, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure thinking back on it, their relationship is actually exactly the same one between Luke Skywalker and Kylo Ren. Isn't that what they were trying to do? It was like teacher and pupil, but he was like kind of unhinged, and so he didn't want to let him in on it, and so he got all like angry about it, and then went off the rails later.
Yeah, actually, because part of it is like, you wouldn't let me do what I wanted to, Dad.
Yeah.
Like it was.
I feel like I feel like this exercise is slightly different because this is just talking about why bad villains are bad. And I think what we should try and do is apply the rules that we know make a good villain to other villains and see if
I was just trying to
if
get
they
his.
even
We were just trying to
exist.
remember who this person was because
like,
he was so uninteresting that nobody
makes
remembers
him work? Like what if we had to fix him? What would we do? I think so.
I don't even remember this guy. He's
I haven't
so
seen the
unmemorable.
movie.
This is kind of a problem with the bad villains exercise, isn't it? We have to.
Well, that's I wouldn't do a bad villains exercise. I would see like villains that didn't quite make it to the best villains and be like, do they still have those things? Because if they do, then that means Thanos has even more. So like if we applied those rules to, what was the girl in Thor? I can't remember her name now. Hela, yeah. So if we applied those same rules, does she fit into both of those categories? And if not, then we can be like, okay, we rule her out. But if she
Are we
does,
saying
then what does Thanos have more that she just was missing? Like,
Are we
well,
saying that she's
Hela-
only a mediocre villain? Because I'm not sure.
Hela is
She's-
like
I mean, I'm not sure she's like Thanos
She's
level.
not as good as Thanos.
Well, sure, but
she-
also, I mean, so one thing I think is worth pointing out about Thanos, and I guess this is worth like keeping in mind as we're comparing. He had 20 movie lead up.
Like a lot of talk about him, you mean?
And a lot of post-credit scenes and things. Like we
Yeah,
even
but I
know
would argue
he's-
that I don't remember any of that. So
I definitely did not give a crap about Thanos until he showed up.
yeah,
in
y'all
the
didn't
movie.
even remember that he was blue, so yeah.
I specifically remember after Age of Ultron, I started caring about him.
I never did. I like every
did.
time they would show him.
Okay,
I would be
alright.
like, I don't care about like just make him show up or stop teasing him. I don't care that this guy is out there somewhere
But
right
man,
now.
did
Alright,
they
well,
deliver.
So I think so. Hela definitely doesn't have relatability.
I mean,
Hela is the executioner of Odin, and her whole deal is conquering some sort of poorly defined multiverse.
I wouldn't say that
she
I
was like
sympathize.
neglected.
Neglected. Well, she wasn't neglected. She was the right hand man for a long time before she was put into exile.
I think they did
Right.
enough like character work on her that she is vaguely sympathizable, but it's kind of like the villain Bechdel testing that you were talking about, Kyle. Like she doesn't really exist without being jealous of Thor, does she?
Yeah.
Like
Kind of.
not really.
Yeah, not really. I
what's
mean,
like
she
what's
doesn't-
her point if she's not there to overthrow the
Like, actually-
the dynasty?
Most of the time, because she actually exists mostly independent of the main heroes of the story. But most of her scenes are there to humanize Scourge, incidentally.
right? Yeah.
They're just there to make Karl Urban seem like a teddy bear,
I
which
think
isn't
she doesn't
hard.
work either because I like her, but I'm pretty sure it's just because she's Kate Blanchett.
Yeah, probably.
Right. I mean, she's got charisma, but that doesn't mean she's a good
I
villain.
think you mean modern Shigo.
What?
So
Oh.
All right.
Oh, what?
Part of this also comes down to, and this is an inescapable problem with I think any villain, is some of her writing is bad. Like
It is.
Yeah.
like they do.
It's
this-
like it's fun
That's
bad
true.
in that one.
It's fun bad, but it's
But
like
maybe that's just the context of
well-
Ragnarok. I'm not sure.
she isn't as good as the other actors in the movie at being able to balance serious, dramatic business time acting with is it really style like improv fun acting. Like when she does her silly lines, it comes across to me as really poor,
yeah.
as opposed to everybody else in the movie.
So
who pulls off.
so she doesn't make it. I would argue that
Yeah.
she just doesn't. If she does fall into either of those categories, it's on like the bottom of the scale, like just barely. Like yeah, she could be relatable, but not enough
I did not
to
find her relatable.
Okay,
So
okay. So
maybe there's-
other I think objectively good villain that we've forgotten about
Yeah.
is the Vulture from Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
He was a good one.
He's
Wait, what
very
did he do
relatable.
again?
His whole deal is
Was he relatable? Yeah,
what?
he was.
just to summarize him briefly, he represents like middle America, laid off of a manufacturing job,
Mm-hmm.
and so he starts up a chop shop with Chitauri alien
Oh,
tech,
yeah.
selling it on the black market because he gets. Basically, he's a victim of outsourcing. His entire contracting company gets cut for Department of Defense. It's actually insourcing, like
Yeah.
government workers instead.
And he's almost not even doing anything bad at first. Like he's
No.
doing things that are illegal, but he's not doing anything like morally reprehensible necessarily when it
Yeah.
starts.
Yeah.
I
think
have
that-
arguments to make for why he's not good. But go ahead.
I think that one of the things that makes him good and Thanos good is that, like, when you think about them, you are channeling some outside anxiety that you have about the real world, which is not true of Hela, unless you have like an evil
Oh, that's a
sibling
good point.
somewhere.
Well, that's true.
So
That's-
his
Too far. Like she's yeah.
So that outsourcing anxiety that like is very real today, and so is the overpopulation, scarce resources thing. Those are
So
both.
I would argue that he has something kind of working against him, which is that his counter is a teenage boy. And so it just kind of makes him like there's two things I don't like about him as a villain. One, he really, really reminds me of like a raging alcoholic. Like just a normal guy who gets pushed too far and then just is an insane lunatic.
Yeah.
And like that's not like relate. I mean like it might exist, but it's kind of the Purple Man thing of just like no one really thinks of themselves like getting close to that really. So that's
So-
one. And then the other one is that he beats up on like a 16-year-old boy. I know he's Spider-Man, but like
So I
Tom
think
Holland. Look at his face.
I want to disagree with those points.
Sure.
So if the whole point of Homecoming is Spider-Man doesn't have a job, which is kind of normal, but like Spider-Man is like ready to be a superhero and doesn't have any direction.
Oh, sure.
And so the whole deal is actually, this goes back to what I was saying about him, about the plots being bigger than the heroes.
Mm.
Like he doesn't do anything reprehensible until Spider-Man gets involved. And Spider-Man keeps sticking his nose in. Like every time he does, like he beats up on a 16-year-old or goes off the lunatic fringe.
Yeah.
It's because he's trying to pull something off, and Spider-Man gets in the way.
What was
It's
he
like-
trying to pull off though again?
He's trying to sell a bunch of stuff. He's trying to at the end he's trying to hijack the Avengers Tower is being gutted, and he's trying to hijack that plane. If Spider-Man doesn't get involved, it all happens without violence and without any outside.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's implied
Casualties.
that he's been successfully operating for like the past 10 years.
But he wasn't
or
trying to
something
kill anybody,
doing this
was he?
with it.
No.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
really-
it was just
he
like-
was selling stuff to criminals, which is like questionable.
Right, he was arms
obviously.
dealing.
No, okay.
But yeah, he wasn't really like everything was running smooth until Peter showed up and started like messing with things. So he was the catalyst for things going wrong.
Right.
I just think
also-
Americans don't necessarily have a problem with black market operations. See every prohibition plot line ever. Like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
so
definitely.
that doesn't make him inherently evil in the public's eyes. I don't think.
I mean, they showed it's bad. Like they show like the people robbing the little bank kiosk
Right.
with way too much weaponry and like the over militarization, or like or the Donald Glover's bit actually, where they're trying to sell Donald Glover stuff that is like set to kill a bunch of humans, and Donald Glover's like, "Whoa, man, I want something that makes a big noise."
Right.
Like,
See,
but they also never bring up like he doesn't know he's beating up a 16-year-old.
That's true. I guess he wouldn't.
Like he just
Well,
knows.
he does. No, he finds out later,
Not
doesn't
until
he?
the end. Yeah.
Well, at the end, yeah.
After
then he,
he's
like,
been
lights him
really
on fire or
pissed off
whatever,
by
I don't
him, he
remember.
kind of yeah.
And then even then he
well,
doesn't
yeah,
seek
but
him
he's-
out. At that point, it's like Peter makes the plane explode.
Right. Well, but I think for him, like everything that is so sympathetic seems almost like too strong of a word. I understand his like logical thought process into becoming a terrible person, but I can't relate to it. And there's enough things that counter it that it like doesn't hold up. Like, yeah, he did get laid off. He has a rough life. He found something that works. It happens to be illegal. So it's like there's so many things where I think they just counter it. I mean, do something else. Like, I know that your hands are tied with the job thing, like you got laid off, and it was super. I was pissed when I watched it because I didn't know he was going to be the villain. So I remember thinking like, this is such a garbage situation for this dude. Like, super sucks. But I just feel like too much of him was like overly aggressive and weird and like super and just not relatable. Not
Well, there
like
has
It
been-
ruined his emotional like.
yeah, he snapped.
His whatever.
There
I
has,
don't know.
there has
what-
been a
yeah.
very relatable, very sympathetic, still awful version of this character done very well because they spent so long establishing him, and it's Walter White from Breaking Bad.
I knew. I was thinking about Walter White. Right.
Well,
he's the hero though, right? Kind of. I haven't
No.
seen, I
No,
haven't
not
seen
yet.
Breaking Bad. Does he
It's
become?
Breaking
he's
Bad.
way-
Breaking
way
Bad is
too-
a show about
okay.
a villain.
Okay.
I
Well, yeah, I know
Breaking Bad
that,
is
but like I
actually-
meant the protagonist. But is he the protagonist?
He's the anti-hero. Like
Yeah.
he's the one you want to see go down the entire time.
Okay, so you kind of hate him.
He's where the word sympathetic breaks down. Like you can definitely understand everything he does, and it's because he's a terrible person.
I mean, Rachel, he's the villain. He's just the main character. That's
Right.
Right.
That's what I.
He's the
yeah,
protagonist,
okay.
not the hero.
I haven't actually seen much Breaking Bad.
There is no hero in Breaking Bad.
Oh,
He's
okay.
it's just the main character about a villain.
Right. I think so. I think
it's
going
great.
back to the Vulture, I think he's really relatable to a lot of people though. Like I know people who relate to him. I know kind of middle American style like who.
Yeah,
it's
he's
sort of
the-
like their revenge fantasy almost.
He's the hardworking dad. It's literally the same group of the same audience that goes and sees revenge dad movies, which is a category. in the genre.
Anything involving Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Liam Neeson actually. They're all basically the same.
Interesting.
But those are-
Thanos is like power dad, like
would-
all powerful, always powerful dad versus like dad that's been undercut by society despite like by no fault of his own. He's
Yeah, where the
been
mom's
his
at?
power's been taken away.
I would argue that revenge fantasy, like that kind of thing, is miles away from the sympathy that they develop
mean,
with Thanos. Like it just
sure,
it-
but-
like everyone
'cause
can
they-
imagine wanting to punch someone, but people who actually like could see themselves being like, yeah, I might actually not punch, but like kill somebody. Like, yeah, I might actually kill that person is a lot further than like I might agree to let half the world die because you don't work that one time. And honestly, like there's arguments like because
I think you underestimate how many people are totally in line with sympathetically punching people they don't like. It's,
I mean, but he does. I mean, he
I know. I will say this.
He goes so
do
much
remember,
further.
Like the Vulture does actually just straight up murder some of his workers in the middle of the day once.
It's actually my least favorite part of the movie. I felt
Right.
like that broke his character a bit.
Because he's like, huh? I thought that was the freeze ray.
Right.
And then he goes on like, I think you're right that it does. It's a little bit of it's an indulgence on the writing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, there's another part. Like later, he finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, and he gives him a shot to walk away. He's very human in that way.
He actually gives him multiple chances, I think, to not be involved until finally he just shows up again.
That's a good
and
point.
he just collapses the building and
he even
walks
lets
off.
he lets him date his daughter. He's like, you're gonna go in and you're gonna show Liz a great night.
Right, yeah.
He's like
That's just psychopathic to me, though. That didn't come across as like, I'm
know,
giving you a chance,
Just
kid,
meaning
not to
his
kick
goal
your ass.
isn't to kill a kid. Like, that's not what he's there trying to do.
he has a gun in the
Yeah.
car. He could kill Peter.
Yeah.
I mean, he could try.
But the thing is that, like, you can tell he wants to. Like, he just comes across
I
as
disagree.
too
I
much
thought he
of the...
definitely didn't.
What I got from him personally was that he just wanted to keep his business running. And
Yeah.
most of his actions, I thought, supported that pretty well.
But
And
he was just, like,
the
so
only times
crazy.
he took any kind of, like, aggressive stance was in defense of that happening.
Yeah.
And then right when it was finished, because he ran into Peter on the train, like in the car at one point, like there were multiple times they interacted, and right when he got rid of him, he went back to what he was doing
So-
and didn't like hunt him down.
So are you saying that he's Thanos good?
he's one of the better Marvel villains?
Yeah,
I
Darren
don't-
Marvel.
I don't, which, again, they've been criticized on their villains, so it's
Is
not
he
like
Fisk
a super high
good?
bar. I'd say he's below both of them, but he
Well,
would
Fisk.
be...
Now,
I'd
Fisk,
say he's the low end of the good villains, probably,
Now-
at this point.
one thing for Fisk, that you refuted for my Thanos point. That's fine. We get a long time to be comfortable with Fisk.
That's totally true.
We get like 8 hours.
Series are hard to argue with because they can spend so long.
Right.
Yeah.
So and this is kind of like probably a lot of the quote unquote sympathetic villains. There's a ton in Game of Thrones. That is the series for this. I mean, especially if sympathetic is understandable.
Yeah.
Like if you're talking about like if you go, well, given the complicated power dynamics, I can see why that's a valid move.
Sure.
You still suck, Walter Frey.
Wow.
Ew, gross. No, absolutely not. No.
I think it might be good to talk about Killmonger
I don't know who that is.
in Black Panther,
Oh,
the villain
right,
in
that was
that.
the other one
I think
I
he's
liked.
a very
Oh.
sympathetic villain.
I disagree strongly.
Well,
What? I would
I-
argue that he is.
he's
No.
he's a rejected son. He's a person without like parents, without a
Yes.
background, and he knows like he's coming up and trying to find his place in the world, and he's become strong enough to carry out to make his vision a reality, like Thanos did.
I
Okay,
think
but
he's
now
so
I'll pick up
relatable.
on what Allison was saying. He's a psychopath and he murders indiscriminately and supports other people murdering indiscriminately.
Okay, but okay, so I think that's different for this character specifically because you can actually like watch his like you can see where it all starts to go wrong, and it's a lot more relatable because it's like it happens to like a child who then grows up as like a neglected
Yeah, see,
I'm kind of trying to remember, but I remember thinking that I really liked that character. I don't think he's necessarily super relatable to me, but I could see where he could be relatable to most people that I know, honestly. Like, there's so much humanity to his story that I think, like, even Thanos is missing just being an alien and a bird guy.
I think he's different than some of the other ones. I think because his story, like his villain-defining moment, happens when he is a kid. I do actually think that plays into it.
I think
Right.
I see those as almost two entirely separate characters. Like I can't like so
He's
it
very
goes-
different. He's
like,
not the same as the other ones.
Well, for one thing, like I mean, so like, part of it is, and this is a really really strongly unpopular opinion. I think I don't like the way Michael B. Jordan acted him at all. It did not like I found him to be like he was just so casual off the cuff. He seemed bored all the time. He was like, nah.
Well,
I like it, and like
that's
like,
like a-
but
that's
he didn't. He didn't give me rage. He didn't actually give me. He gave me like young kid who was like trying to be kind of a braggadocio style like big man, but he didn't really, I didn't really got emotion off of him. Even when he was dying, he sounded like it sounded like he was like through like a layer of smoke or something. Like I couldn't actually get emotion from him.
I think there's a
Wow.
certain complicated way in which when people use the like Ave in formal context, it's like a flex.
Sure,
Like
I mean that's not what I'm talking about though.
so
It's
that's the
about
point of
emotion in
being
your
like
voice though.
being like nah and not showing emotion in emotionally fraught situations is also a
I
kind
get
of
the-
flex about your control.
I get the tone
So
you're going
the put
for,
on
but, like,
the put on casuality is I would argue it's him is
didn't
him
like it.
exerting his own kind of strength.
I think that
That's too subtle
I
to
think,
come across in that.
I think
scene.
the
I don't think
biggest
it's too
thing that character is sort of missing is that that character has been done multiple times before really well, and he just wasn't like standout. I think he was. I think he acted. I take that back. I do think he's standout for that example, but doesn't compare to how far villains have come because that's a really classic
Yeah.
like villain
Yeah.
trope, and it's just been done too much.
It's
Like
actually-
that's what you think of when you think of a villain. Like, oh, it started young, he grew up, we saw it happen,
Right.
now we get it, and maybe like slight redemption
Yeah,
later
sure.
or something. But it's
I
just,
think
I
that's
also
Oh, good.
I would argue like so part of it is I mean this is maybe just something I didn't believe his motivations ever because his actions kept being contrary to his stated motive. Like he has his girlfriend in the beginning, right? He uses her as a hostage and gets her shot. He does not care about his own. Mm-hmm. And his whole deal is I want to support my people like me. And all he does is exude violence and control for the sake of power without ever trying to protect anybody.
yeah, I mean, that,
And
I think
so
that's
I just-
actually
It's interesting 'cause
consistent
I
though.
think the other characters in the movie actually recognize that about
Yeah.
him and point it out.
Sure,
do.
but
Yeah,
I mean,
it's part of the character.
But it's not. His stated motivations don't match that. His stated motivations should involve protection as well as empowerment, and he doesn't at any point ever display protection. He's willing to spend human lives as long as he gains power doing so. And so I never believed him when he was saying things.
I mean, I actually think that's just part of the character, though. I think part of the
Well,
character is the fact that he's so removed from what he thinks he's doing, which I think is super relatable. I know a lot of people who just like
Well, but
who
it means-
think they're doing something by standing up for blank, but in reality, the actions of that are almost exactly opposite to their ultimate goal.
It's not.
So-
It's not that would. He's not the architect of his own downfall, which is how I would write that character. If
He's
you,
not.
No,
He
Black
doesn't
Panther
kinda
beats
lose in
him
a
up.
fight. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I
that's-
know, but he like makes decisions that make.
No, I mean
it
his
so
only his
that-
only thing was not pulling a bullet between Black Panther's eyes after he falls off the waterfall. Otherwise, he would have won entirely.
That's
Like
actually fair. It probably would have been more interesting if he had somehow destroyed himself, because then it would have at least brought that part of the character full circle.
As it is to me, I felt like if the character was. It's fair if you say you're doing one thing and you're not doing that thing, and that's why you fail. It's another if you're trying to do one thing, and I just think he wasn't written in a way that emphasized everything. All of it. It felt to me like a mistake, not like a point of his character. It's possible to go the other way.
So I would say that he doesn't actually qualify for the second half of that. Not that he's not necessarily relatable, but that he just doesn't follow through on like the threatening aspect of his existence. He's just a dumb kid that grew up wrong and had like a lot of issues and ultimately just wasn't as scary. He wasn't really like didn't Black Panther have to like nearly die for this to even really be like kind of a fight?
Yeah,
Wasn't he like
yeah.
I mean, he was like
he had to
super messed
voluntarily
up.
remove his own power. Well, I guess
So
he
he's
was
just
force
not
fed this
he's
stuff,
just
right?
not threatening. He's more like a buzzing kind of annoying villain than he is like genuinely terrifying.
But
Like
didn't
not
he-
Thanos scary, not even like hella scary or
I actually kind of
hella
felt this
scary.
way about the movie in general, sort of. It was like all of it was.
That's
all
a
of it
different
was
topic.
good.
That's a different
It
topic
was
for
just-
another day.
It was kind of like what you said, where it's like he was very classic. It was something that
Yeah.
like we've seen before,
Right.
kind
Right.
of, and so it didn't really
I definitely have.
hit me as something like innovative.
Well,
as
I-
far
I-
as villain.
I have a lot
personality
to
goes.
to rave about the Black Panther. The plotting is not it. It's,
Yeah,
it's
well,
almost everything except the
so-
plotting. So that's another
Right,
topic.
Let's think
parts-
of oh go ahead.
As I say, the parts where the movie shown for me were actually with I mean, other than the cool designs were with Killmonger and his moments where he was like confronting colonialism, I guess, because I don't think I've seen a villain like deal with that
But
directly.
he didn't either.
I mean, he deals with it. I'm not saying he resolves anything. He's not a perfect character, like you guys were saying. I think he makes sense as a person who would exist in the world because he does stuff that's contrary to what he claims is his overarching motivation, and that's a really human thing to do.
Sure.
And I think that makes him a credible villain. I don't think he's as terrifying as any of the other three people who we've named as like good villains, basically,
Yeah.
or like scary villains. And one like
Well, it's just part
I-
of being a villain is having that threat behind you, right? Like
But I do find him to be emotionally realistic and emotionally believable in a way that none of the people we've brought up are.
I can actually stand by parts of that statement. I think that's fair.
Like
Okay,
the
the
reason.
actual important question though, was he wearing any purple?
Yeah, at a certain point. Well,
Oh.
okay, was he?
Yeah,
was
he
he?
was no, he was the
No,
orange
he don't
one?
wear purple.
Because well, I think
He likes
they,
gold.
They both
One
have
was
like
orange, one
they
was
both have
purple.
like force effects from their suits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was it Black Panther who has the purple one?
I think
think
Black
so.
Panther is purple.
Okay, so he's the right
Black
villain.
Panther is the villain. of the
Yeah, that's
movie,
what I was
basically.
okay.
Oh my
We
god.
solved it. Okay.
Fisk doesn't even wear purple, so I hate to be that person. it doesn't
Fisk
follow
does
through.
wear purple.
No,
Fisk-
he is
Fisk
known
wears
for
a
wearing
white suit and a
white.
purple tie.
No, he doesn't.
In some of the comics, he does.
Okay,
That
well,
is his-
but
that
you
is his
can't
most-
just be like, oh, in
His
the
most
comics.
classic look is wearing the purple.
Oh, really?
Like neck piece, yeah,
Yeah,
with
the
the white
ascot.
suit, yeah.
Is it purple? How do you spell Fisk?
Fisk, like fist, but with a k.
You mean
Also, what is the energy from the weapons that Vulture uses? Is that purple?
I think
can't
it's
remember.
blue.
I think it's
Is it blue?
Yeah.
Just wanted to see if the theory held up all the way through.
It does actually look like he wears like a purple ascot. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of
I'm
his.
telling you.
But that's in just one variation of him. All the
Oh
other
no,
ones
the
are
white
red.
suit one is Fisk.
No,
Well,
no, no, no.
It is
He's,
Kingpin.
he's
Kingpin,
you're right. It
right,
is
yeah.
white, but he also has red and blue and purple.
Yeah, but
and
we're not saying he's to
black
wear
and
purple all the
green.
time. It's just, have you ever worn purple? Bad.
He's scariest in the purple. Definitely.
So here's another thing. So these are all big imminent villains, like destruction into the world style villains.
Sure.
Are there any there's other kinds of villains that are more personal? Like, so I was trying to think of
Walter White.
Sure, well, he gets up there, doesn't he? Like, start dealing with cartels and stuff.
Yeah.
I was thinking like Ironmonger, not Killmonger, but Ironmonger from
From the first Iron Man.
Iron Man, who is not a great villain because
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, I mean, so he's the only reason he's a notable villain is because they hadn't done it 8 times yet.
I
Right,
think
I was
that
gonna say he was,
but-
yeah.
I think that all he does is exist is that. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
It's just mostly he is and this is where I started on this line of thought. So I'm trying to find a better example than Ironmonger. But like mostly what Ironmonger represents is a threat to Iron Man, not to the world or anything. I mean,
like
it's-
personal
he
villains.
sells weapons to other
sure,
countries.
sure, but I mean, so did Tony Stark. The idea
Well,
is
Tony
he's
Stark didn't do it. He did it on behalf of Ironmonger. Did it on behalf of Tony Stark.
I
They were
think
both
he
doing
ends
it
up
on
making
behalf
the
of-
argument for like the nega villain, like the
right.
the-
It's because he's the exact opposite of Iron Man. Like that's
Right.
why I cared. I didn't care
Right.
about the impact in the Middle Eastern countries. Sorry, it was just
You didn't?
No,
That
wait.
was his main problem.
You meant that they didn't make you care about it.
Sorry,
They didn't
yeah,
get you there.
I should and they didn't, and that's their fault.
No, the reason he worked as a actually, you know what? That's because again the Ant-Man villain was basically the same character. That's why
Yes.
everybody disliked him. But the Iron Man guy, Jeff Bridges, whatever his name is, I don't remember what his actual name was.
Josiah Stone.
This just,
Obadiah Stone.
Obadiah, yeah.
Obadiah Stone.
It just occurred to me that that's probably what's actually wrong with Hela is she is the nega Thor, which is super unrelatable because it all like has
Right,
to deal
actually-
with this like stuff that just can't be relatable because
Right.
Thor's a weird like
It's always been a problem.
space
with
Well,
Thor.
so
Yeah.
I know, that's what I'm
far back
saying.
callback. What you're saying is about the relatability of Hela.
Right,
Is she wants to destroy Asgard and I couldn't care less. That's a different podcast.
Okay,
Right.
you're right. You're right.
But all I was gonna say about those, like the reason that the Iron Man bald guy works better than the Ant-Man bald
Right.
guy is because he has a personal impact on the main character.
Right,
And
it's-
so that's where the sympathy comes from, is that that relationship exists.
Yeah.
actually-
Whereas the other guy's just kind of a jerk who's there.
I also
Yeah.
think there's a lot of anxiety channeling going on with Jeff Bridges. Almost like the only thing they did was anxiety channel, like in terms of like the proliferation of weapons and the overarming of things. And
Right.
they're channeling that anxiety. But I think that Jeff Bridges' charisma also goes a really long way.
Well, it's
Didn't
like-
he
Yeah.
like write that movie with?
they wrote a lot
What?
of that movie on set. That's I want to like learn more about that and do a whole topic on improv in professional movies because that's a huge thing. But so like I was thinking like so you know who the actual better foil for Paul Rudd in Ant-Man is not Yellow Jacket. It's the stepfather.
The stepfather?
Who's that?
It's the one who has his kid.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Like they don't play it up. But like if we wanted to do like a who represents the me that I want to be or the me that I
Right.
don't want to be.
That's a good point.
Right, it's the stepfather, and I mean the divorced father versus stepfather trope is really played out like Liar
Yeah.
Liar and the Santa Claus and
Yeah.
other children's movies.
Yeah.
But like it's and I think it's
But
been
it's at
noted.
least a good like base for it. Like it exists. Like you can
Yeah.
see the potential
Right.
Well, that's a good
existing
point.
there.
He had a relationship there, whereas like Ant-Man doesn't have any connection to that guy at all. Like he's Hank Pym's old
Right,
person, but
that's
Hank
it.
Pym isn't the main character of the movie.
Right.
And so it's like, but the Obadiah Stone of Ant-Man, like it's kind of caught in catch-22 because it should be the stepfather, but now one thing Ant-Man has been praised for is good stepfather relations, like ex-father stepfather. Well,
I like
ex-father,
that, yeah.
Ex-husband stepfather relations. And I think they do a good job of it, but
Yeah.
the personal foil there would be that guy.
Yeah.
So they're kind
Yeah.
of caught there. It's interesting to me.
So do we have, now that we're kind of getting close to the end, do we have any kind of like encapsulating anything? Like have we
I think we
learned
have
anything?
consensus. Yeah, I think we learned some stuff. I mean, we learned that the best characters are a specific type of sympathizable. Like you can look at them, and
Understandable.
whether it's you can actually see yourself agreeing with them, or that you can like, I guess, relate to the people who would be at the wrath of them. Like
Yeah.
there's just like different. Anyway, I think that's a big part of it, and I think the other big part of it is making sure that they're the threat is realistic, like within them. Like not only are they capable of doing harm, but specifically the harm that they're invested in, like
Yeah.
there was a point where they probably could have defeated Thanos, right? Like physically defeated him
Several times.
Yeah, definitely. So it wasn't so
It's
much
all
that
Peter Quill's fault.
his force wasn't that he was like an intimidating giant purple man. It was that he had what it took to actually destroy the universe. So it's
The
it's about
strongest
the
of wills,
threat.
if you will.
Yeah, I won't.
Yeah, I also think it does need to do that. It does need to play into some kind of modern fear, or else it isn't very hard hitting,
Right. It needs to either be like a societal fear or a personal fear.
right?
Yeah.
Like, am I like? I think like the Iron Man deal is this who I am? Right. This is like all the reasons not to be like that. It's very much a like we're saying. It's either to draw it back. It either needs to be am I like this, or can that happen to me?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good way to sum
So
it up.
here's another question too: is it necessary for the main villain to be as well developed a character as the protagonist?
No.
We got
is
we
that
got like 5
required?
minutes left. What are you doing?
I'm trying to bring it all back around.
It kind of depends. So like,
Yeah,
I-
does it because we've gone over a lot of different examples, and I'm not sure all the ones that we've said are good fit the same level of like being thoroughly characterized. Some of them
Right.
are just forces of nature, and they still work as good villains.
It definitely depends on what your story is. Like this goes back to your classical like man versus nature, man versus God like style conflicts, man versus self, all those kinds of things. Like for instance, Iron Man 3 barely needs a villain because the villain is, can I exist without this suit?
So
Now there's some villains who are set pieces that like. I mean, this is why Iron Man 3 has kind of a split rap, right? Like, if
Yeah.
you look at it in terms of a traditional Marvel movie, it's not very good. If you look at it in terms of just pure character development for Tony Stark, it is good, and it does have consequence, which, like, we see in Homecoming. Like, if you need this suit, you don't deserve it.
right.
so what answer are you trying to say to his question?
The answer is you don't need to have a fully fleshed out villain, and if your story isn't a strict antagonist versus protagonist intended conflict.
That's
I
actually
would actually argue that you do need a fully developed villain, as much so, if not just barely under the main characters. I just think that you're capable of doing it in less time. I do think that's actually possible, like
I don't know,
because they don't
actually,
really
they're good.
because villains don't need the same arc. And
Yeah.
just, they can be straightforward, and you can develop them really well by just going further back. Well, I think Infinity War did a good job because they actually go back in time where you see him interact with young Gamora, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But they developed him, I would argue, just as well as some of the other characters in that, and they did it in less amount of time. But he holds up because of that, and I think a lot of the other villains don't, because we really just don't get to go there with them. We don't get to dive that deep into them.
Well, I guess that's sort of like does it need to be what is the difference between a good villain and a good character?
Story
almost,
element?
at that
Right.
point?
So
Because
I have a-
because Thanos is a great character, but I would still argue that Hela is a good villain because she serves the exact function she needs to for
Right.
Thor.
Well, I
Because
mean,
Thor Ragnarok isn't about beating Hela; it's about Thor going through like a personal
fair,
growth
yeah.
and like leveling up and like learning how to be a better person.
Which
Basically,
is shown by the fact they barely interact.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and she doesn't
No.
show up until the very end.
I
Once,
think-
once he's already gone through his whole arc, she's like his final threshold to pass.
Right.
Basically,
I genuinely think that's a
Yeah.
really big question, and we have 3 minutes left. Like that is a
Around, actually, I have a,
that is a podcast question in itself. Like, is it a good villain or is it a good character?
Now,
is
I
Kate
have a-
Blanchett a good actress or is she just tall?
Notice how tall she is. I've said this multiple
Because I'm
times, but
tall and I'm not good.
where did this question come from?
It's a quote from Kimmy Schmidt that like really like sent me
that where it's
spiraling a long
from?
time ago.
I think it's,
Yeah.
it's so here's my to bring back a lot of what we've been talking about into a single phrase that I think will get a lot of work out in this podcast. It comes down to everything with purpose.
Yeah.
What I need to know are the villain's intentions, not just their actions, but why they're doing those actions. And the people for instance, Yellow Jacket, I know what he does. I don't really get why. Sometimes
Right.
I do, sometimes I don't. Thanos, I know exactly why. Fisk, I know exactly why. So intention matters a lot with villains. Can you show me more than just they do bad? Can you tell me it's not just how they do bad, but why they do bad?
Sure.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, make them purple.
I think I
Make
think
them
that
all
really
purple.
is. I think we made a good argument for why that's
Yeah.
really important. Not that you of all people would understand.
You know what? What's his name? Jeez. Civil War?
Yeah.
That guy's also purple. The villain.
The not Russian, the guy
Not
that
Russian.
from,
Yeah, and like, is he Sokovian? Maybe he's Sokovian.
Yeah, Sokovian.
But like, his actual, he's based off a villain who has purple in their name.
is he really?
Yeah, promise.
All right. Well, I think that sums it up
All
pretty
right.
well.
Well,
Sorry.
It's okay.
yeah. If you listened all the way till now, thank you. We clearly figured this out within the first 5 minutes and didn't need to keep recording this entire podcast.
Yeah, I agree.
But now we've gone into detail.
I think it's important to take what you've learned from this and apply this to your own life. Really, when you think about it. What
If you're
colors are you
colorblind,
wearing?
You can't recognize people's like morality at all.
we were talking about
Colorblind,
totally different
you're
things,
also
but yeah.
character blind.
Oh my goodness.
You're soul blind.
This
All
is
right,
why I have
so-
trouble telling the difference between like horrible supervillains and just like a guy at the supermarket. I can't.
You know
I
what,
just don't know.
Kyle? I wear purple all the time. It's taking this. You haven't probably got it yet.
Ian's my best friend.
All right.
Clearly I've
Well,
been wrong.
while we settle with, we'll step away and deal with the consequences of Ian's last statement.
Oh my God.
And I think next week we will be doing the topic on. Do you remember what the topic was going to be for next week?
The next one we had planned was like aging with
Oh,
your
yeah,
audience.
it
or
was
something
aging-
Like that. I don't know
yeah,
if we'll
it
do that
was.
next or if something else will come because Captain Marvel comes out in like 2 days, so that might change. What we
Oh,
do.
that's true. Well, at some point we will do the aging with your
Yeah.
audience because that'll
We
be a
have-
really good one. But
We have a whole list, and if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments.
please do.
Please do. Yeah.
And we're gonna be doing these every other week now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we will see you guys again in a little while.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening.
Catch you.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.